Yeah, you should be able to do it. Is it working? Yes, we're recording. Great. So I'm going to share the first two slides of our conversation tonight. So first one is this one. This is something that we have done with Terrence in 2017. We were noticing that we start having an increased amount of speed of change, and the speed of change is equally increasing what we call the speed of systemic risk. We were talking about it because we're looking mainly at the economy, at the environment, at the climate change problems. So we were doing this in terms of understanding what is currently happening. But what we actually noticed is that the possibility of a systemic ripple effect, so a domino effect that will become much faster, is part of the kind of challenges we're having in having moved away from incremental model to exponential models. So here at that time, we were noticing that the economy was increasing their speed, that the financial market were increasing their speed, that businesses were somehow being impacted a lot by increasing volatility. So somehow when we went back to this slide, which we did back in 2017, we were able to really see that we kind of foresighted this few years back, not specific to the coronavirus, but to specific to the kind of problems that we might have in the 21st century, given the degree of integration we currently have. And so the next slide I'm going to show you, which is what I was sharing with you before, because we tend to see mainly volatility in statistical terms, but when we do that, we tend to actually disregard the events happening outside of the probability curve. We actually have an increasing amount of events happening in the external side of the curve, in what we happens to be called mainly the black swans. Now, again, in the specific case where we're talking about financial risk, because we're looking at the markets, but you can argue that the pandemic is equally a black swan, because you never really are going to be able to see this happening. Or if you can imagine that something like this will happen, there's a very interesting experiment that was run in October by the World Health Organization. There was mainly a game, a simulation, that we were actually facing a pandemic. And so I will invite you to eventually search for it. I might be able to have the reference that I'll share with you as well. But interesting, it's a simulation, and it simulates what would happen in case of pandemic. Even if we can simulate black swans, that we can, what we can't understand is when they will happen. So we have lost the ability to forecast with some form of precision events that tend to be of this large scale. Now, one of the things that I will try to connect also with the conversation of today, I've been asked recently, as people were asking for my opinion, could artificial intelligence have helped us with this? The answer is it could have helped us if we were able to define a very narrow scope of our question. Again, artificial intelligence might not be able to forecast when the black swan will happen, but it might be able to forecast the degree of scenario they're possible, because it's able to mainly use both incremental models, then also a layers model. They're coming from deep learning to eventually simulate multiple degree of scenarios. So the answer to the question would be, it would have helped to understand the progression of the scenarios. It would not help to determine when it will happen. So a lot of this still has to be dependent on our ability as economies or countries to know that many of the events will never be able to be forecast when, but when they happen, what is our response mechanism? And this is somehow where I think it's like an invitation for you to think on how do we improve from this example that we're currently experiencing to build more resilience, more responsiveness, more international cooperations, better use of use practices that can go from one part of the world to the other, and the ability to actually orchestrate response, especially when they're no longer part of a confined environment, like, for example, a region, but they tend to mainly transfer itself, because every single year, about 2 billion people, they cross borders. So we are constantly in contact with each other. So there's no way for something like this that would have not really occurred. When you're looking at the overall degree of the pandemics, you notice that the pandemic is very visible in the northern hemisphere, less in the southern hemisphere. But the southern hemisphere is also where you have in a high concentration of poor economies that might not have either the testing kits or the ability to differentiate the coronavirus from a flu. So we should consider them, the number of people currently impacted might be larger. That should not scare us. The corona flu one day will become a flu. I think the issue we have is the elderly, but more than that, our healthcare response capacity is actually not designed for so many different cases at the same time. I'll stop this and I'll make the very final comments for you to see the extent of the problem. Just because I think you are being asking yourself the question, are we overreacting? So an example like in the US, and I don't know the example in Russia, but you can make your own determination by searching for this. In the US, with a population of 330 million people, we have about 3 beds for every 1,000 people in the hospitals, right? So it means that we make a calculation and we say, okay, if I have to determine what is going to be my availability of beds in hospital, I come up with a number. In the US, is the case of 3 out of 1,000. Now, you know that what matters in case of crisis is how many people you can deal with in the intensive care unit, the ICU, because mainly what it really means, so for you guys to hear it, is that a medical doctor will need to prioritize who gets the oxygen and who doesn't, which is also a terrible ethical choice to make. Now, in normal times, so every day, about 65% of the beds in the hospital are occupied. So we have an occupation rate of about 65%. So the marginal value we have to play with is about 35%. If we have in a pandemic, you understand that number 35% gets reached very fast. The problem we're having is that we're putting a lot of pressure in the healthcare system. And that's why government are trying to flatten the curve, as they say. But it's mainly a problem for those people that need attention, because for most of us, fortunately, this will be nothing more than a flu. But it shows you that the real crisis of the coronavirus is not the real mortality rate, although it's higher. It's the fact that it challenges profoundly our institutional framework for healthcare and our rush in calculating support in case of normalcy, when black swans are everything but normal. So it's a profound information for us to think in the future. How will we redesign structures? I'm going to give you a quick example in a different industry that worked very well. During the simulation of the 2020 Olympic in Tokyo, before it happened, which we don't know if they will happen now, the question was, can I have as many people in the city of Tokyo that will mainly come to the Olympic without building new infrastructure? And so what the city of Tokyo did is simulated mobile homes or temporary facility or cruise lines as a way to supplement the scarcity of households. By doing this, they were able to say, if I need to reach a capacity of X, even if I don't have the infrastructure, I have some form of marginal activity that will help me reach the infrastructure. So mainly, imagine that you have 1 million people coming to the city and you only have 100,000 seats or beds. How do you get the 900,000? The answer was modular and interoperable and temporary facilities. There's no way we cannot think about the same for healthcare. We need to have a mechanism in place to reflect that in case of extreme events, we are able to convert temporary facility into beds or hospitals so that we decrease the pressure on what we currently happen right now. We decrease the impact that it will have on the global economy, and we actually also decrease the panic. One of the things that I have to tell you very likely will happen is that if we were already on a really low growth rate, this will, of course, push us into a global recession. How quickly will we be able to recover from this? I think it depends greatly on the financial system. But it's for you to see that even if it's a very annoying topic, and I mean, I guess like me and you start getting annoyed by this entire story about the virus, it's also one of the greatest opportunities we have to reflect in which way we will be able to really redesign our institutions, which still have a stock of design coming from the 20th century. So just to close the loop on this, before we talk a bit more about technology and AI, which is what I wanted to share with you today. Before I do that, do you have any question for me at this point in time? And I invite you to do this, please, because we are actually in the luxury of being a smaller group, so we can talk.
Professor,
yes.
We have been struck by the coronavirus. We in Russia have been struck last week by the financial crisis.
Yes.
Appreciated ruble by about 15–20%. We're still struggling. So in addition to this panic on the looming medical catastrophe, we are facing actually emptying pockets. And there are a lot of conspiracy theories that are now set forward. I just came from a business forum. They say, Mr. Sechin knew it already, so it was a planned event. Coronavirus was a planned event. Americans contaminated Chinese. Everything was planned. So how do you evaluate in terms of social psychology what is happening? Looking for these conspiracy theories. Does it have impact on business as a whole?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is very interesting, and I have read very similar article that go in the same direction. Of course, we don't really know, and I don't know whether we'll ever find out. Historically, we already had diseases that look very similar from, as you know, the SARS back in Asia, the MERS in the Middle East, the avian flu. We used to have back in time something called the mad cow, which was a disease transfer from cows to humans. So we have had experience in the past of diseases that mainly make the jump from animal to humans. I think the difference now, I guess, is that as it started in China, and it started with a large amount of people being infected, and China being, just bear in mind that 1 out of 5 people in the world is actually from China. All right, so it's a large number. And the real number is 18–19%, but it shows you that 1 out of 5 is really Chinese. So I think it's, I don't know how to deal with the concept of the conspiracy theory. All I can tell is that the recession is happening because our system were already very fragile from before. The reason why they're very fragile is that because we built our entire economy on foundation of debt. And many countries are mainly broke, to be actually absolutely very honest. We have a lot of speculation in the financial markets. Yesterday, you noticed the market lost in many parts of the world a lot of percentage point. Whenever I hear this, I know that somebody in the world is making tons of cash as we speak. You know, there's something that you learn in finance very easily, is that you don't make money when everything is actually steady. You make money when things are volatile. So there is, of course, a number of people that will benefit from this, which is one side of the story. The fact that we continue to have a lot of debt at the government level shows you that our economy have not really been growing on new capacity, but they've been growing on an old system that has been dragged along multiple decades. And events like this is simply putting the pressure to the system that the system is about to collapse. So I think to me, what this shows is, number one, that we are mainly paying for a price of a poor design, that the design was great in the 20th century when we did not have so many people, but in the 21st century, I don't think it works anymore. That the role of China is becoming, one way or the other, a predominant player, because we see that China has somehow an increasing prominence around the world. The fact that we see a spread out on global level of every single thing that we've seen in different parts of Asia, now reaching Middle East, Europe, and North America, it shows that the system are much more connected than what we think. And so if something was a poor design back in time, now it's becoming a large poor design that is visible by everybody. I don't know whether this was done on purpose in a lab or not. What I can tell you is that whatever purpose it is, if it was to mainly change the world order, it's pretty much achieving its goal. In this crisis, the US is unable to deal with it in a way that is becoming a global hegemon like it has been in the past. China now is the country that is sending its own medical staff around the world to consult countries on how to deal with this. It's a major change of global leadership that I think we were not expecting in the first place. And I think, going back to an era I know better, the European economies are under a lot of stress because they have realized that aging population that they had for a long period of time is a major form of systemic risk when it comes about medical capacity. And medical capacity in social welfare country where the government pay for it becomes now inadequate to deal with the kind of problems we have. For me, it's a wake-up call in multiple ways that suddenly things have really changed.
Maybe a couple more questions, just to make it more interactive.
Sure.
We have here one insurance company, sport business, construction, pharmaceuticals. These guys always cashing on all. Can you comment?
Maybe just later.
Now, Russia is a very inward culture. When you get to know Russians, they're very wild. But, first impression is that we're very cold.
We are like coconuts, you know, very hard. You know the theory about peaches and coconuts? I think we discussed this once. There are nations like coconuts and nations like peaches. Peaches are very warm outside, but then inside you have the core, right? Russians are coconuts, very hard from outside, but actually inside you have the soft part, you know that, right?
Okay. I'll try that. Next time I meet somebody from Russia, say hello coconut, and I'll tell you how it goes. I hope I won't get, you know, I won't get enemies out of this. Well, anyway, even if you don't have a direct question right now, I hope that anyway can provide you with some space for reflection on the relationship between, I think, nonlinear studies and studies of complexity, and what are the implications coming from things like this. Now it's a pandemic. It could have been, you know, cyber terrorism. It could have been the price of oil a few years back that is mainly going to decrease their profit for a number of different players. That now this is specific impact in the financial market because of panic and the mobility industry, so airlines, transportations. Few company will never recover from this. Other company will recover from this. Government will have to create stimulus packages to support, which means that public debt will increase. It's an unfortunate scenario that I think we are just putting enormous amount of pressure on the system, but I hope that the pressure will be enough to make something break, so at least we can learn how to build it from scratch, because otherwise we keep on having life support mechanism for things that should have already been maybe behind us right now. But anyway.
Thank you. Maybe one more question from me, because I have been coming with this for some time. This January I was at Ararat Forum, and I witnessed some Harvard professor talking about lack of trust in Russian society, and indeed in Eastern society, as opposed, for example, in Scandinavia, where everyone trusts everyone. And this psychological lack of trust to each other, not to government, not to financial institutions, but one to another, this actually entails a big cost to the economy. Now, with this redesign that you're thinking, you're presenting, how do you think it will redistribute this trust criteria? I mean, will it erase all the differences in terms of trust, or will cultures still stick to their norms, how they trust each other? Because now, basically, you cannot trust anyone because they might have breathed some wrong air. You know?
Yeah. So there are multiple implications in your question that I think are interesting to say. The first one is that the public trust has been particularly lost in the last few years, because we can't necessarily trust government that much anymore. I think in the last few years, we start to feel a very strong disconnect between government and people. So no matter whether you have democracy or not, there is this sense that the government is not taking or making the interest of its constituents. And this is something that has happened, especially after 1980, 1990. Because if you think about 1950, 60, 70, 80, there was a really strong ideology, no matter which part of the world you were. And people were mainly, they were finding themselves identify with that. Today, no matter where you come from, you tend to be more skeptical that the government interest will be your interest. And I think this goes to the second implication, that political leaders around the world have become very detached from the reality of everyday life. So I happen to work with, part of my work is consulting for governments, and I happen to work with a number of either government or head of states. My direct experience is that their life has nothing to do with my life. They don't have the same experience of society the same way I do. They don't get stuck in traffic the same way I get stuck in traffic. They don't have to go and maybe send something at the postal office and maybe line up, right? They don't deal with problem with how to start a computer or how do I fix a technology. They don't have to worry whether their Wi-Fi will work or not. They tend to be detached from the reality of everyday life. And I think we have created globally a class of political elites that tend to be, also relatively well-funded. So politicians were not supposed to be rich back in time. But today, if you're looking around the world, the number of relatively prominent politicians that are relatively wealthy and they're coming from a financial industry or have very large tie with the financial industry increase even more the distance that we currently have. That's the second implication. The third implication is that we have the technology that we could actually use to decrease the problem with transparency or public trust, like, for example, blockchain. But many governments, they don't want things to be transparent, because if they're transparent, then they can't necessarily hide anymore. This is the case across the globe. I remember meeting, Estonia is a country that became independent after the end of the Soviet Union. So I met the previous president of Estonia, Toomas Ilves, when he was at the World Economic Forum in 2014. And Ilves was a pioneer who brought e-government in Estonia. So now Estonia is one of the world leaders for e-residency and mainly government on blockchains. Now, Estonia is also, as you know, is a very small country. So when he was bringing the ideas to the European Union, he was sharing with me that countries like Germany or France mainly said, no, we can't do e-government, because where will the servers physically be? Will they be physically in France? Will they be physically in Germany? So once it becomes a matter of where the servers will be, it shows you that we're not understanding the nature of the value we have. So I find that transparency could be addressed through technology, and I hope that over time governments will go in that direction. Fourth implication, and the final one that I'd like to share with you. In many parts of the world, the political leaders are relatively old in comparison to the average age. Let's take the most extreme example. In most African countries, average age is around 20 years old, but the average age of a politician or a prime minister would be 80 or 85. Even in the US, when you're looking at who is running for president against President Trump, is somebody either like Sanders or Bernie or Joe Biden. They're respectively 77 and 78. They represent a generation that is too far away from what could be, for example, the average age. And I think the fact that we didn't have renewal in the machine of global leaders, with few exceptions, I think is a problem that we see around the world more and more. So I would say these are some of the implications that lack of trust is currently bringing. But to give you a sense of solution, we could address this with technology more now than ever before. And that would be something nice if we could eventually go in that direction. So I hope I answered your question. Vika.
Mark, I have a question related to that. What do you think is going to happen to the global competition? Because I think what we're seeing now clearly is the lack of coordinated response, right? So I think with this situation will teach us as humanity, and teach the world leaders that we need to be, more united and more coordinated, or the opposite, everybody's going to take advantage of is going to try to take advantage of the.
So, Vika, it's a difficult question to give you just one answer, but I share just my thoughts on that, right? So I think there are, again, two possibilities. One is that this will create even more friction between countries. And I think we've been noticing that if in the 20th century, the idea was convergence, in the 21st century, especially after 2016, the idea became fragmentation. Now, I personally find that what is quite absurd is the idea of nationalism outside of globalization. And let me try to be more specific. if you really want to be a nationalist, you should be the best globalist of your country, because no country can become nationalist unless you play in the global sphere. So we see that country, they're able to play in the global environment, the global mainly ecosystem, they can take care of themselves much better than country they're mainly already nationalists. So I think we will see either the rise of a nationalism that would be more connected to the global economy, or we might see the rise of a nationalism that would keep on creating more fragmentation. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to coordinate responses in terms of challenges that we have in the 21st century without making them political responses. You know, one of the problems that I have with the current system is that if I will tell you that one response is political, then I'm creating an ideology about this. Let me try to make an example. The Paris Agreement was a great way for us to say, we as nations recognize that climate change is a problem. We have to collaborate. But the moment when in the US, President Trump decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, we make the Paris Agreement an optionality based on political ideology. But how can the climate be a political ideology? And I think the same should be for things like public health, you know, let's say corruption, let's say transparency, the conversation before, let's say, for example, collaboration on climate. I don't think that countries should all agree on everything. And I think it's still important that regions determine their own destiny. But I think there should be some clear challenges that we face as society that should never become politicized. Because if they become politicized, then of course it become a struggle of powers rather than anything else. And I hope that the pandemic we're currently experiencing will re-change the perspective on international collaboration on public health, so that we will understand that public health is a value that is above political ideology. Because if we don't do this, now we will be able to address the coronavirus. Let's say the estimate is that in the worst case scenario, we'll need 4 months to normalize. So it will take us up to the summer. In the best case scenario, it will take us about 2 months. It will take us up to May, right, to normalize. This is what country like China have been able to do. Korea was able, because of a tremendous amount of work on technology that Korean have done and tracing all different patients. So Korean have been able to curve it a little bit more within a month and a half. China took 2.5 months. Let's say the European country will take 2 to 3 months to figure this out. You know, I think, you know, we will eventually prevail from this. But my worry is not the coronavirus now, although it will become a major problem to recover, is what happens when the next one is coming. Will we go into the same mistakes, or will we be able to have now a much better response mechanism? So that's, I think, Vika, where I see the opportunity. I really see this as a fork, right? Either one or the other. One thing is for sure, I don't think that things will ever be the same since now. You know, maybe I don't know in which direction they will go, but for a fact, we have really seen changing chapter or changing page in the global economy. I think we will remember 2020, not only because it was the beginning of a new decade, but because it was the beginning of an entirely different system. It wasn't necessarily the way we should have done it. This came out of a shock. But, you know, there's something called post-traumatic growth. It's mainly the growth that happened after trauma, right? So I'm hoping to come back to Russia next time, and maybe we can talk about what has been the post-traumatic growth that we were able to actually learn from the coronavirus.
And you can stay 2 weeks. You can stay 2 weeks to visit some of our events.
Oh yeah, absolutely, guys. I mean, I think that's the deal. You know, I have to tell you this. I even said to Vika, we can say that, right? Even if it's worth it, who cares? The world is changing anyway. I said, listen, change the location. Let me fly from a different country. I'll fly myself to a different place. Just change the flight ticket. Let me get on the plane. And then, of course, because whoever made the decision is chicken and didn't want me to get coronavirus, then I got stuck here. It's okay.
Now let's talk about AI, shall we?
Yes, because I got myself already so much in trouble. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about AI. Let's try to understand more about artificial intelligence from the work that Terence, Danny, and myself have done with our book, And that was the book that followed The Drive, which is now what we're currently promoting around the world. Now, again, you have to see the connection. We started to say more and more connection between technology and how society is mainly being impacted. And out of this connection, we thought that the one that best represents the challenges and also the opportunities is the one that is mainly called AI. Now, and I'm talking about what we have done in the book. We have been very careful in overemphasizing intelligence in artificial intelligence. We don't think that AI is intelligent per se. What we think is that AI is extremely powerful computational capacity that can do a lot of things that will change, even in this case, major social and economic structures. So let's try to understand why it was called intelligence in the first place. Because it was replicating some of the things that we do. I'm going to make you quick examples. When we used to do calculus or calculation on the board or on the paper, we were doing it ourselves with pen and paper. When we introduced the calculator was now doing it for us at a much faster pace. In fact, the calculator is one of the first elements of intelligent tool that we really had. But bear in mind that when we talk about intelligence, we're not referring to human intelligence. We're referring to an intelligence that is mainly some of the things that are cognitive that we can do, like calculus, that can be somehow replicated by a machine. That's all it meant. But the original idea of artificial intelligence was never really considered to be intelligence as the way we think of intelligence today. And that's important. I'm going to show you the first slide of, the first slide today should be actually the cover of the book. At least I'm usually pretty bad at marketing. So I should learn that I should tell you more. This is the book that we're currently promoting. It's called The AI Republic, and it's a book where we are very proud of. As Vika mentioned before, we were able to get into the Amazon bestseller list. Oh, that's my dog. Within a few hours from the launch, and it's been so far a quite lucky experience for us. I want to take you to a few slides that I have prepared for you. Let me just share for a second. Stop the sharing, go to the specific slide, and then be able to share again. So this is the very beginning of things. You probably don't see it yet. I will be able to share with you one more time. This is it. So before I show you this, do you have any clue when the term artificial intelligence was introduced for the first time? Any idea?
I just know when I was a student 20 years ago, and I'm graduated from the university's, how is it called, cybernetics faculty, engineering and cybernetics. So I had such subject as artificial intelligence, but I had no idea what is it at that time, and I'm a little bit forward now because we use it in our business. But anyway, so 20 years ago, I knew these words, but no idea what it was.
Okay, all right. Well, I happy to, when I ask this question in class, usually I have multiple answers, right? And we tend to think about this being already around for quite some times. Well, we don't know exactly since when. And that's what I like to do now before going back to our conversation. So this is the original conference, 1955, where somehow 1955 was the conference, the phrase was coined in 1955, and then a conference was launched in 1956 in what we consider today to be what we call the founding father of AI. At that time, artificial intelligence was mainly the fact that through computation that it was not done by humans, something could actually look like cognitive skills. So we've been dealing with a quite old term for quite some times. So whenever you think about artificial intelligence, remember 1955 and then 1956, the period of time, that's when we started to coin the term of artificial intelligence. So we have been having this for quite some times. Why are we now into this almost like obsessive idea of AI? We talk about it every single time. The answer is in the next slide. The one we used to have was pretty much determined by rules. So you see here, there's rule-based, and then there is probabilistic AI. Rule-based was basically saying, every time that I press 3 times 3, the answer must be 9. If I'm looking at, for example, an air conditioner, every time that the temperature outside is warm, the air inside will be cool. Every time the air outside will be cool, the air inside will be warm. I plan it accordingly. So for a long period of time, we were looking at AI mainly as a rule-based concept. I plan it, I program it, and it will be somehow automated for me. And it worked pretty well for quite some time. What happened is that at the beginning of the millennium, we started to study more and more AI as a mechanism of learning from studying biological systems. So if before we were using IT, engineering, cybernetics, now we were looking mainly at biological systems. So the question was, how do we learn? How do systems learn? And systems learn by trial and error. They're constantly iterating, so up to a point in which they're becoming more functional. And so the AI scientist today is no longer what an AI scientist used to look back in time. Back in time, it was mainly somebody that was coming maybe from mathematics or from engineering or from information technology. Today, the AI scientist knows coding and knows how to program, but he equally knows something about natural systems like biology or chemistry. And the reason why we have a different kind of AI today is because the technology was tested on trial and error. And as you try and err, and you do it several times, over time, the machine learns how to differentiate a specific set of problems. So just briefly for you to have a sense of it. I stopped the sharing just to make sure that I am just talking to you. We used to have AI for a long period of time, and it was mainly AI driven by rules. At the very beginning of the millennial, in the year 2000 onwards, we started to experiment AI more as a trial and error. So learning was a mechanism introduced, and the rise of machine learning really is what changed the game, in which now I was able to use an algorithm to differentiate simple things. Terrence, I think this morning, Vika, when he was doing another event, he was talking about cat and dog and how you differentiate it through machine learning is a perfect example. If I'm asking an algorithm, can you identify who is a dog, who is a cat? At first, the machine will make a mistake. So you will correct it. That's called supervised machine learning, up to the point in which the machine will try to take a guess, so to say, of what is a dog, what is a cat, and the accuracy rate keeps on increasing. At the end of the exercise, as the data set you collected is significant, the algorithm will be able to determine with high accuracy, 95, 96, 97, 98%, whatever is the number, what is a dog, what is a cat. And that mechanism is really what changed everything. Because then when we started to add more components, something like, is the dog brown or is the dog white? Can you identify brown dogs from white one, or whatever is color of the eyes, type of hair, size? You have introduced more layers in the conversation. You are shifting from machine learning to what we call deep learning. And since 2010, deep learning has been the major driver that's changed the way technology like AI are mainly working. Because then we realized that maybe we can use AI for many reasons. We started to use AI for weather forecast because we could actually determine that the chances that it will rain when a number of different conditions are in place is very high. If you ever look on your smartphone, sometimes it tells you what is the chance of rain. And when it say it will rain 100%, most likely it's raining outside. Then we started to use it on GPS, making sure that we were using something by saying, if I'm coordinating your location with the speed you currently have, can I determine in the traffic, can I determine more or less what time you will arrive at your destination? And I'm pretty sure you always ask yourself the question, how is it possible that you get at your destination pretty much at the time in which the GPS tells you? Maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes difference? But that means that the degree of accuracy now is close to 100%. Then we started to say, what if we use this for financial services? What's one of the easiest things to do? Fraud. How do I detect fraud? If you're using a credit card, how do I know that it's you using the credit card rather than somebody else? Well, the answer is, if somebody else, they will use it in a behavior different from yours or in a different location. So now credit card fraud prevention has 99% accuracy rate, one of the highest in the industry. So if somebody takes your credit card, the chances that they'll be able to identify that there's been a fraud is very high. So this degree of accuracy has changed everything, because if humans tend to require significant part of time for doing some tasks like preventing fraud, the algorithm does it right away. If, like the calculator was replacing people making calculus on pen and paper, artificial intelligence is replacing a lot of jobs, primarily in the office. And that's the challenge that we have. A little bit of the conversation I wanted to have with you is not only what AI can do, because I think that's a conversation that we can always do and you can always read about it. But what I think AI is about to do is to disrupt a lot the labor force that we currently have, because similar to the conversation we had before about the coronaviruses, our institutional framework are old, guys. They were designed in the 40s, in the 50s. They were designed when we started to think about free markets being the driver economic opportunities. We were deciding when we started to use financial services to define equity and financing of firms. They were designed in an entirely different period of time. Like the system was designed in the past, our jobs were equally designed in the past. So let me ask you another question. If I take 300 jobs that existed in 1950, and I ask you how many of these 300 are still existing today, what do you think is the answer?
Half of them, half. Or less.
Okay. Unfortunately, 270 still exist. So 90% of the job that we designed in 1950 are still in existence. So let me tell you, you know why we're going to replace job with algorithms? Because they were job designed in the 50s when we didn't have technologies. When we were mainly the technology, we were mainly the provider of the service. I have a slide for this for you. Make sure I can also support you with some references. Now, this was a different kind of, this was a different one, 2016. You'll be able to see it. You probably don't see it yet. I'll show it to you right away. It was a different study. It was mainly on the fact that not always the forecast happened with the same rate of accuracy. But look at this. You should be able to see this. Can you look on your right-hand side? This was 1950, and in this specific case, it was 270 jobs, right? Look at the number of jobs still in existence today. You guys see that? What do you think will happen to those jobs over time? They are perfect candidates to be replaced. So why are we replacing jobs with machines? Not because we have any evil intention to replace people with machines, although the economic incentives are in favor of transferring those skills from humans to machines, but because many of these jobs were designed when we actually were doing the labor ourselves. And so here's the interesting story that is important for us to consider. If in the previous industrial revolutions, we were always replacing jobs, but we're moving people upwards, in the current industrial revolution, that's what we call the fourth one, AI by itself does not create a new job when it replaces one. So if we're not carefully redesigning jobs, we find that the large part of the population that used to do a job that was designed many decades ago, because they have not been trained fast enough, and they are mainly maybe educated, but not easy to train, they tend to be in a limbo. Quick example. Imagine you are a petrochemical engineer. You have a degree in engineering and a specialization in petrochemical. Imagine you're shifting that to an automated services where you're doing robotized drilling, and you don't need people anymore to do the same job. Even if you have a degree, it's so difficult for you to retrain yourself to be something else. Now imagine the same happening if you were a mechanic or working a factory floor. Your job is replaced by a robot. Fine. What can you do after your job in the factory floor had gone? Some of them, they become Uber drivers. But you understand that Uber is not a solution to the fact that our economy is no longer working as it used to work before. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, as technology will always do what technology is designed to do, which means increasing efficiency. And as this technology is now much more powerful than before, because it can replicate some of the functions that we used to do. On top of it, our job design was designed when we used to be less exposed to technology, or we didn't have technology. We will naturally lose jobs to technology, but the question is, can we train people and make them employable while also creating jobs we currently don't have? If we're able to address these challenges, then technology like AI is just a blessing. It will move us away from job where we have a lot of repetition, shift us to a job where we can be more non-repetitive, more job related to sales, marketing, commercial, creativity, collaboration, design thinking, emotional intelligence, empathy, complexity management, nonlinear distribution. There's a lot of jobs that we can think of. But if we're not actively redesigning new jobs through the help of also technologies, we're going to have a large part of the population that will become maybe difficult to retrain and difficult to employ. And here's where I want this conversation with you today is to also be a conversation on social structures. When a large part of the population can no longer be employed, or they cannot, sorry guys, that's my dog. I think somebody's coming in, and so I cannot do anything about it. You have to bear with me. Yeah, somebody's coming. So let me see whether he can let me talk. If we're going to continue to think about large parts of the population not being able to be trained or employed, what will happen to them is that they will radicalize more and more. So one of the problems we have seen in the West is that, especially after the two major events of 2016, Brexit and Trump, is that who decided to go for leave the EU, who decided to vote for an anti-establishment president like Trump, were those members of the population that had been more radicalized because they lost access to the social benefits. So there is a profound relationship between technology, designs of jobs, the way jobs have been designed back in time, displacement of jobs that do not automatically create new jobs, lack of training or retraining or upskilling of jobs that are difficult to reposition, radicalization of public opinion, rise of more radical political figure or more radical political ideas. So there's a strong relationship between geopolitics, technology, and things like that. And so what's the possibility we have ahead of us? Is instead of thinking of technology as being an immediate replacement of humans, we can think of technology as a way of creating jobs we currently don't have. We have seen already in research that when you're integrating technology with people, the performance of the job increases much more than if you're only leaving the job people versus machines. And I'm trying to make an example, and then I love for your question to come to me. If I'm asking the question, who is better at predicting a cancer, a doctor or IBM Watson? Well, by the IBM Watson, as you don't know, is the larger database of medical research that we have in the world. It's powered by IBM. Now, if I'm asking the question this way, by the way I'm asking the question, IBM Watson is a much better answer. So I will tell you the doctor will have a chance of predicting cancer X. IBM Watson will have a different number. So IBM Watson is a superior form of prediction. But if I am integrating a different question, what will be the prediction rate if the doctor is using IBM Watson? The rate of prediction of cancer will be much higher. It means that the answer is not man's versus machine, it's integration of technology with jobs. When we do that in artificial intelligence, we call this symbio intelligence. When we do this at the robotics side, we call it cobotics. And so what we've been able to study so far, and the book has somehow demonstrated that, is that when we integrate in technology with people's job, by changing the nature of their job, we increase performance much more than if we simply letting the relationship to be machine versus jobs. And that's a reflection for us to have in general. So just to summarize on what I think we really should think of is opportunities for new jobs to be created, the use of technology as a way to really address some of the social challenges we currently have. We could use technology for extreme weather events. We can use technology, for example, for climate change. We can use technology to optimize crops. We can use technology to improve agriculture, which is currently going through a lot of stress. We can use technology to increase transparency, because we can use technology like blockchain that increase the transaction transparency between variable A and variable B. We can use technology in medical research. We can 3D print things that can be tested and implemented in the real world, like we can 3D print coral reef that will help the reconstruction of the biodiversity in oceans. We can 3D print bones that will grow inside of the body, allowing people maybe to have better therapy than hip replacement. We can use technology to improve people that might have severe problem with autism or other kind of mental health issues. Technology is a wonderful thing if we use it for the right things. Unfortunately, the research we have done in the book is that we continue to think of technology as a replacement of jobs, but I think there's much more to that we would like to eventually explore. And if we're not careful with this conversation, what we'll see is just technology for the sake of efficiency. Very few countries in the world capable of affording these technologies. We already talked today about the AI arms race, mainly between China and the US. So that's not necessarily the purpose of all of this. The purpose of all of this is for us to really give access to more and more people for this technology. Reason why the book is called the AI Republic. The idea that this can be a distributed and diffused technology rather than proprietary and in the hands of very few organizations. So that's to give you a bit of a sense about where we are with AI, the title, the research, the jobs, and our hope in general. And I'm not sure whether you have any question for me. And I can use any other material I have to redirect the content towards that.
Maybe I will start and
please.
We at Russian Managers Association, we issue each year a rating, which is published both in analog form of a newspaper supplement and also in the digital form.
Mm-hmm.
Top 1,000 Russian managers. This is our mega project,
Yes.
which has survived all regimes, all governments, all coronaviruses probably too. So last year we also had this Future of Management Professions forum, and we have been contemplating on whether it's an enemy or just an added tool or integrated tool. The question in Russia is that this digitalization and production efficiency is sometimes driven top down, and that we have national projects declared for practically everything, also for health. How do you see in terms of management of these new technologies? Can you potentially give an order for this technology to be implemented? Pump billions and sit back and relax. Go to Spain. I don't know, a little bit like, or what is the best solution to fertilize this technology?
Yeah. So there are multiple dimensions to your question. The first one is, can we afford it? There's a lot of issue with that, because especially technology closer to AI or machine learning right now is still quite prohibitive for a number of different small, medium enterprises. So what you see the trend in is that many startups, they might have a startup in artificial intelligence or machine learning, and if successful, they get acquired by the large company, And so that's one side of the story. Technology is not yet fully distributed to the point in which you can easily have it. So there is a discrepancy between who can afford it and who cannot. That will be the first conversation. The second one is that over time, if the management realize that technology reduces the cost, especially where you start realizing that running companies becoming harder and harder because of cash flow, one of the arguments you will make is that can we replace this specific function with a software? You don't even need AI. Sometimes a software is good enough. Think about payroll, right? And so the economic side of it will always prevail. Over time, when the company is able to find the capital to invest in technology, they'll do it. And once they realize that technology has replaced some of the jobs, they will eventually let people go. That's somehow something that we've been noticing as well. What can you really do? I think there are a number of things. One is that you can really free people of the tasks that tend to be very repetitive, because that's where we're not really making best use of our talent. The second thing, you redesign jobs that are different because of the integration of technology. So you have to think about how redesigning jobs and hiring in a way that is very different from what we used to do right now. Mainly because the type of profile you need are profiles that need to be much more generalist over time. People are able to adapt rapidly to changing conditions. And also, how do you work on collaborations that will tap on people not necessarily always being related to the same environment? Quick example on that. If there's one thing that the virus will actually teach us, is that we can do a lot of collaboration virtually without physically being there. Now is only a contingency plan. But I can guarantee you guys, there will be companies that one day will say, hey, do you remember how we did it during the coronavirus? We didn't have to send people to fly over. We can do it over Zoom. Now imagine what it will mean. It will be that some position will nearly disappear. Other position will rise because you're now having people able to collaborate virtually in an effective way. I think that's what I think the three possibilities that we'll have is that, first of all, the access, because now it's too expensive. The second one is the redesigning of, the second one is that in no matter what, there will be an economic incentive to replace some functions with technology. The third one, you study where you're redesigning job and function based on the ability of technology that we have. And that changes, I think that's what the role of management in the future is, to really be able to synthesize the opportunity that technology gives to us, also to create function we currently don't have. I'm gonna give you an example that will resonate with you. If back in the 1960s, they introduced the ATM, the bancomat. At the time, people working in the bank were freaking out by saying, will our job be gone now that you can go and pick up money by yourself? Well, the answer is no, really, because now that I have taken away a very repetitive task, I was able to redesign the job of banking professionals to do something else with them. And in fact, the banking industry grew in size as well. So in the Management Association, I really would hope that new study will be made on the integration of technology in existing and new jobs, on collaboration that doesn't have to imply the same fixed cost, and also on how can you mainly use in more flexible structures to mainly collaborate with people. Because, and it goes back to the question you asked me before, if I ask you now, can people telework, work from home? In many parts of the world, the manager will say, how do I know this guy are not at a golf club? The answer is, you can't know. You have to trust. Now, what happens in real life? In real life, in the first 3 months, people readjust. At first, they take advantage. Maybe they do more things outside of work than work. Over time, they find the balance between work and non-work. But if you're able to create the culture for that, as a company, you're going to save tremendous amount of cost in the fixed cost. So you don't have to necessarily to get rid of people. What you get rid of is actually infrastructure cost, utility cost. So I think the opportunity for management in the 21st century is to redesign what is a job, when the job today is no longer coming from a repetitive task that used to be shaped around the factory, and then it became somehow similar inside of a computer. when I think we're going to see enormous ability for us to redesign what it is like to work. But if we don't manage this properly, we'll see more and more people being replaced by technologies, because the estimate says that the labor cost in a company is about 30% of the total cost. So there's a lot of companies that will do anything they can to save 30%. So if we leave it only to the economic model, economics in that case will always win. Any other question you guys have for me?
It's now your last chance.
I still have one.
Otherwise, you go to Spain.
Sorry, that's me again.
Vika, yes.
Yes. So again, related to that, so speaking about people who are going to lose jobs, and there are going to be a lot of them, right? I mean, it's worrying and it's scary, no? Because I think one of the greatest challenges we have now in the world is inequality. And it looks like this is going to contribute a lot. And this inequality is going to become an even bigger problem that might lead to, I mean, I don't want to say words like revolution, but still we're seeing this quite a lot already, right? All this like rise of the populism and all these things. And why, I mean, what, like, I don't really see any responses. Like, I don't see any, I don't know, unicorn company which is devoting itself to retraining people or coming up, you know, with different solutions for those people who are going to lose their jobs to technology. Like, why do you think it's not happening? What could we do? Like, what should be the response there?
So we got, again, your question, guys, are question that can have multiple implications. So I'll share just the one that I think, you know, could maybe help in the insight on this. So we don't see this because for long we've been trained to think about technology and humans one-to-one. So if I tell you what is the example I was asking you before, what is more effective, a software or a person? Well, by the way, I asked the question, the answer goes to the software. It's like if I ask you, who is more productive? Somebody working in a bank or a teacher? Well, naturally, somebody working in a bank will have KPI on productivity. A teacher benefit will only be seen after a few years this teacher has worked with a child, for example. So just the question that we've been asking for quite some time, we're always more in favor of the economic and efficiency models. Therefore, this is why I think it's an almost like an unintended cost that we have in having more and more people job being replaced by technologies. I think what we currently can say now is that those companies that have been able to discover that the integration of technology with people by maybe allowing them to be more more detached or unattached by the repetitive task, there have been a higher performance in the labor force, are the company that have been able to mainly hire people no longer coming from the technical fields. Let me try to be more specific, which is a paradox. The large technology companies from Salesforce to Facebook to Google, they've been hiring non-technical staff at the rate that we've never seen. Just to give you a point of reference, Google used to hire 6,000 people, mainly gigs. Now they're hiring about 30,000 people. Most of them are marketing, business, commercial. So interesting, the technology company are humanizing technologies, and the other company are actually they are robotizing the firms. I think the question is, how do we learn from this company that what makes the company successful is their human capital? And how do we start defining metric to determine the return of the human capital so that we can start investing, training, and retraining? Because also I think we were really blinded by the idea that all you need is to have maybe just a higher education, and we are in the education field. But one of the first things that you have noticed, Vika, working for IE, is that suddenly IE started with exponential learning. You have told me before you took a high hope. You know, I have developed two high hope for IE, one on innovation, the other one on leadership in under disruption. And the high hope are 5 weeks courses. Somebody even called them MOOC, which is it's a kind of MOOC, right? Where we're trying to close the gap between where people are, where we like people to be. So I think over time, as education is becoming much more lifelong, continuous, shorter cycles, we'll be able to really help companies to shorten their gap between skill gaps we currently have, and help a lot of people being retrained and rehired. But before, if you remember, before we had this high open MOOCs, all we had was mainly either undergraduate or master degree. And so people were saying, you want to have a higher position in society, go back to school. Now, going back to school is still a great idea, but we also know that a degree by itself is not a guarantee of jobs, because what we need today is no longer just a degree, but the ability to work under different circumstances. And I think if we're learning that training short cycle, like in the IE exponential, right, we can really close those gaps. Millions of people that currently are unemployable, they could become employable again. And the cost of training them in short cycle is much more affordable than training them in actually larger cycles. So I think that's one of the possibilities I see more and more, that many companies are going to become somehow introducing corporate training and corporate learning. We were seeing, for example, that companies like McKinsey or Accenture, they have their own university or training centers. Why? Because they have access to knowledge and content, and they now can start shortening more and more the knowledge their consultant needs to operate with different kind of clients. I would imagine that over time, there will be more of this model introduced inside of firms to reduce mainly the gaps and make sure people are more reusable. Otherwise, the scenario we see is a quite difficult one, right? Where large part of the population might become difficult to employ. Again, and I need to tell you this, both Terence, myself, and Danny, we are all techno-optimists. We think that technology has the potential to improve the life of people if we manage it properly. What we are not optimists is the management of the technology by humans, right? So we are concerned about the mismanagement of technology, but we know that we also see technology as a phenomenal opportunity for us to really close some of these gaps. Because as you mentioned at the beginning of your question, Vika, the inequality problem is a problem that we see. We start noticing more and more inequality in different kind of areas. So if it used to be income inequality, then it became capital inequality, then it became life expectancy inequality, then it became gender inequality. I mean, we start having, soon it will become food inequality, healthcare inequality, right? I don't think we can afford to run the system as we ran it for the last few years, because I think we're running out of options. But we are equally very, very positive that technology can really help us to address some of these injustices, because what technology really can do is to simplify, accelerate the performance, and distribute. In fact, one of the first things that we mentioned in our work is that we would like technologies like AI to be highly diffused and distributed, so that millions of people actually have access to the power of this technology. Like millions of people today can use a calculator to do calculus instead of doing them manually. So that's briefly to give you context.
We have one more.
I don't know if you guys have other questions for me, please.
Thank you so much. Anastasia Spanova, I am from pharmaceutical company Stada. First of all, thank you so much for the frank conversation about these conspiracy theories that you asked me about. I have two remarks. The one is about government and transparency. We have maybe you have heard that we have a draft of law about distance selling drugs that will provide the opportunity to people in villages to have to buy some medicine by internet. But at the one hand, our government is opening to people and provides this internet to every village. At the other hand, this law is stopped and industry can't do nothing, and 2 years passed and nothing happened. And it is the one remark. And the one other remark is about the employers and opportunity for this field that is opportunity for everyone. Some experts, I was working there for 3 years in the government of Russian Federation, the council under the social sphere, and some experts from government think that the social sphere is the field that will give an opportunity to these people who are without work and who will be without work. I wonder your opinion on this question. So, is the social sphere the answer? Yeah, the answer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. So I have to say that although I understand why for many years in many parts of the world we wanted the private sector to drive the economy, and we wanted government to become smaller and less involved with the economy. In some of the challenges that we're currently facing, we need the government to be able to really be part of it. I don't find that the government has to be an absent player. And it goes back into the conversation on technologies. If I go back and see who has allowed technology to happen, in many cases were government grants or government funding. We do have today GPS because it was a military experiment. We had GSM, and that mainly led to the rise of smartphone, because it was a way for mainly government grant to a company called Nokia to basically start experimenting a different way of telecommunication. We have electric vehicles because company like Tesla has received from the US government $5 billion in grants. So sometimes we forget the government are instrumental to the technology breakthrough. So they should equally be instrumental in diffusing technology to more and more people. So I always think that the private sector, the responsibility to constantly improve the research, the access, the marginal cost, everything related to the business side. But government has the responsibility to diffuse this technology more and more, so they're becoming shared assets. And I think we see this today with the internet, that because of the internet, we are able to do things that we were never able to do before. So I find that the role of governments in all the conversations we're having is quite important to have. But where, again, I'm a little bit worried is, our government doing enough to share the technology we've been talking today, mainly on artificial intelligence? So we have a lot of national program that tends to be working really well within the country, but many of these programs are really at the very beginning, not very detailed. We will need more collaboration, mainly between governments, for technology like AI to mainly be shared. Because if we don't, we're only going to have very few players around the world having these technologies, and most of it will be in the hands of private companies. So I find that we should actually re-evaluate the role of governments in all of this, helping governments also be part of the solution by allowing the same government to use technology to improve the public service. I guess you've been noticing that in some parts of the world, government are not as efficient as private sector. But that's a loss we all lose because of the wish we would like to have for governments to be able to participate more. And there are work done currently on national strategy for technologies. I think they're still not heavily supported. I would love to see more of inter-regional collaboration where more government can be involved in part of distribution of these technologies. Because when we do, we improve the economy, we create jobs we never had before, we empower people to use technology to improve their position in society, we create economic incentives, we mainly leverage and lift people out of poverty. Just a quick example, and then I think you'll be able to understand what I meant. It was because of e-commerce, that was mainly a priority of the Chinese government, that China has been able to lift so many millions of people out of poverty. it was because of the ability to use technology to lift people position that a country like China was able to lift itself up. So we should think about the same as we're looking at this conversation on technologies. Well, how can government become part of the solution, as I mentioned before, and be an active player within the economic model? I know you have a follow-up question, right?
No, I just want to make a remark because you said about the technologies and IPS, and up to my mind, the people are better and more effectiveness when we speak about homeless people, hospices, elderly, and so on. So I mean the social sphere is
But,
Yeah, as well.
You
Please.
have to disregard the drugstore lobby. You know, once you cut out the distribution through drugstores, what is the business to do? So you have to redesign the business.
We collaborate, with industry, and we did our best to make this law appear, but it didn't happen because the lobby is, and there is some more reasons. For example, Starая площадь doesn't want.
What will rest? What is rest now in Italy? What is open? Shops and drugstores. So the drugstores are the most powerful, businesses. I don't know if.
But we have no law to open them. It was slow, and then.
Let's pass on to the professor.
Yeah. So, guys, I mean, listen, I don't want to interrupt your conversation because you guys are having exactly what I wish, which is a conversation about this. On the social sphere, and the question you're asking, for me, the social inequality that we have seen in a number of places come because of the fact that we have used financial models to define and measure the value of a society. But society can only be measured exclusively on financial models. There must be a way for us to measure it differently. Now, connecting the conversation we have, two opportunities. The first one, changing the measurements so that we define that what the society is looking for is much more than just GDP. And the second thing is, how do we use technology to really close these gaps? We can use technology to, for example, to help homeless people, because we can understand in the mental health problem, the homelessness is not just the lack of housing, is the lack of social architecture in the mind that allows people to feel comfortable in eventually trying to rehabilitate themselves. We can use this with drugs abuse or opioid crisis in understanding the social dimension that are imposing upon people when they decide to mainly consume drugs. We can use it in terms of any form of social issue we have, poverty, marginalization. I find that technology can help us create opportunity we never had before because we can measure events and we can visualize them. What I think we need is to involve both private and public sector to use technology for social justice, because that I think is something that now is only left somehow on its own or to the activism or to the NGOs. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to think about, again, using technology to reduce some of the social gaps we currently have. And we actually have the numbers and we have the data and we have the possibility to discover something we didn't know before. And I think that's where I think there's an opportunity that maybe before we did not have, which is part of what data allows us to do, is to study what could be the possible interventions within a given social problem. So I do appreciate you brought this up to our conversations, because sometimes when we talk about technology, we tend to forget about the social dimension. But the more we talk about technology, the more we're talking about society and people. So I'm happy that this was part of your question to me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark.
Hi.
You froze for a second. Anyway, I have a lot of thoughts on everything that you said, but I want to focus on this one, the technology cost. Let's talk about this one. Okay, I have a perfect example. Back 5 years ago, I was working for an e-commerce company, a rich one, a large one, founded by Germans. Everything was going really well with the money, so not really a problem. So we had an intern. He was graduated from a very prestigious university, whatever. He was a genius. He was great, gorgeous. But he was getting his intern salary of about $500, maybe less, whatever. So he had the task of sorting out some of the letters. I don't really remember what he was supposed to do, but something with the letters anyway. It is exactly what you said, a repetitive task. So let's go ahead. He was doing this over and over and over and over again, and then he started complaining. Like, we have a lot of coders, people who actually want to solve, who can solve his problem, like real easy. But the problem was never solved. He was fired at the end of the day. The problem is that he actually started arguments with everybody, even managing directors about the thing that nobody could understand, that this task was supposed to be automized, but he was getting $400 salary. A coder was getting much more money. His time is more precious than the intern's time. So we can actually use that person real cheap, especially here, like in countries like Russia, and not use any technology at all. I mean, we're not getting this efficiency out of technology. What do we do about this? How do we get access to cheap technology? But one thing that was what really changed it is all this cloud thing that allowed you to pay monthly installment, whatever, and then you will pay. You don't pay too much. So, but any problem of technology cost remains. What do we do about it?
Good question. So I think there are two answers to this. The first one is it will continue to be high because unless we're decreasing the marginal cost, the technology will always be on the upper hand. So only people with money will be able to afford it. So this is why whenever I'm looking at the rise of a technology, before being optimistic about it, I'm always asking myself the question, are the investors or are the capital coming so that this technology will be distributed? So your concern about the cost of technology is absolutely right. I think that there is a problem with where the investors invest in their money and where a lot of technology companies would like to get invested, but they are not easy to be found. So that could create an easy way to really reduce the cost of technology that we have right now. This is one side of the story. The way to reconcile the problem now is to turn the technology that's very prohibitive into a service. So we try to do this actually with our own company that Vika I introduced before. We have something called a podder, which is for us AI as a service. What we try to do is that we develop the entire AI interface, which is an expensive part of the process. What we mainly let it use as a service to mainly the IT manager or the CTOs that are mainly in need of an AI solution. So again, this is only one answer directly coming from my experience. But I think one way that we could have to reconcile this is to start using technology as a service rather than technology as proprietary or being acquired, because otherwise I will always tap on the problem whether who has the money to afford it or not. So I'm hoping that in the next few years, some of these large technology companies will turn it into a service because companies like Netflix made movie as a service. You're thinking about companies like Skype made phone calls as a service. You're thinking about Dropbox, it made storage as a service. So Salesforce is a company that made most of their solution as a service. So I would hope that they will servitize a lot of their technology to small, medium enterprises so that more and more people have access to this. And I hope this is going to happen. We are seeing it a lot into commercial venues, and I'm hoping it will become more accessible also for technology around the sphere of artificial intelligence. But thanks for your question in the first place.
Good afternoon, Mark. That's great, the technology, the robots, everything perfect, awesome. But how we can do that in Russia, not only in Russia, we in Moscow, we have a lot of time this problem that we use robots for some of our own friends, and the robot relies on Wi-Fi on internet. Even today, with you. Yesterday we were beating all this stuff, to get connection, cameras and etc. I've been myself graduated from the States, and we of course in Moscow very spoiled here. We have every second Wi-Fi. We have it here, everywhere we share that. There were a lot of cases like that, even without taxi services, that we need to go from one point to another. And a lot of times this year we had collapses that you get into taxi, all our drivers from everywhere, they rely on this, taxi driver, Yandex, and etc., blah, 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 and they cannot know where to go. So how we can beat? Nowadays, we rely on robots, on Wi-Fi, we're all connected here, there, everywhere. What can we beat? I mean, of course, in NASA and in the States, it's already ahead than we have here, the technology. How we can get friendly usage of internet and Wi-Fi, because of course, a lot of people increase and do money for that. So the question is simple like that. Will we have ever the technology that will work all this IR without internet or Wi-Fi? And when we need to wait for that? Thank you.
So thanks for your question. I think, again, another question with multiple implications. The first one is that every technology has a rate of penetration that depends greatly on multiple factors. So how do we create the infrastructure required for technology? That's a matter, of course, investment, capital, time, government funding, so that you can create a comparable level of performance between regions around the world. The lack of understanding on the technologies by many people has shifted the responsibility on technology to the large companies. So today, when you use a company like Amazon, you're not only using a company, but you're using their technology interface, their predictive analytics, their consumer behavior studies. So they're a company that mainly the platforms, any form of platform organization have been able to use technology at the best of their ability. What I would like to see is more and more small, medium enterprises building their own business model on the foundation of technologies that they can actually use to reduce the cost of work across the globe, to mainly make them more of global players. What I'm trying to say is the following: we need to empower organizations to use technologies as much as they can, so they can become, no matter what they do, technology companies and use access to the data. Because if we don't do, the only fear I have to the question you asked me is who will use the data we currently have and to what purpose? The answer should be data should be available to everybody, so that it's becoming a share value that we then define as a measure of economic opportunity. If data is concentrated in the hands of very few individuals, then especially in the world of today, where technology is becoming the way you're creating value, we're creating an enormous benefit in the hands of very few companies right now. So I think the answer to your question is infrastructure, penetration rate. How do we activate investment so that we are decreasing the cost and more regions can use the same level of technologies? And how do we help small companies to become, in their own way, either data or technology companies, but not relying exclusively on the large companies that we currently have? Because otherwise, in the future, when every single part of our behavior will be part of a digital trace, there will no longer be a sense of sovereignty or independence. Still today, I still think that a lot of our life is conditioned by how a large company are constantly conditioning our behavior. One thing is the conditioning onto a purchase. I'm always afraid that it will condition a much more important factor like health, democracy, important choices in life. So I think you're bringing a question that by itself has a high level of dilemma that I think we need to solve in the next few years. But I appreciate the question you asked.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the question as well. I think my question will be the last. How do you think, what kind of business and what professional area will be rising after this crisis? And another question, what country do you think will be rise up first?
So I will answer the second one. I think no matter what we think of China, it's inevitable that China has become, one way or the other, in the bad and the good, the new center of the world. The question is whether we'll be able to live under the condition of a Chinese hegemony, which is a complex hegemony, because no country in history has ever had the size of China, neither the potential that China currently has. So I think that's the answer to your second question. I was reading that the technology company that were able to incentivize collaboration like the one we're doing right now, they have increased a lot their sales. Just Zoom that we're using right now, during the coronavirus crisis, increased their sales by 35%. Why? Because people were forced to work from home, or university were forced to say, how do I shift the content online? So I think what we will learn in the next few months as we recover from this crisis is really that collaboration will have become very different. We always had telework, we always had online. Companies like IE has always been pioneering this. But you know, they are pioneering, so they are on top of ahead of the curve. There are many universities that never did what IE did. I remember that my first online course at IE was probably in 2012, 13. I mean, there are universities today that professor will freak out in the idea of teaching online because this was so far away from the reality. I think what this pandemic has done is accelerated the use of collaboration. So any form of collaboration companies will have now grown because of the pandemic, but will actually prove to us that there's a whole new market that needs to basically be conquered, which is the one of collaboration tools. Because the needs will increase, the opportunity will increase, the security will actually be higher. But I think that match with the increasing rise of China is something that I see as two inevitable trajectories from what is currently happening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shall we wrap up? If no additional questions, I'd like to thank you for a very deep lecture, but I would call it a frank conversation. We very much appreciate it. We'll keep on reflecting. If this virus drama, as you said, in 2-3 months, gives us that on September 15th, we have a big forum. We hope to have a big forum on future of management professions. So let us invite you to come, subject to all this stuff. Yeah, in reality, and to give you a bigger audience, and maybe a bigger interaction, offline and also online. And we'll work with the international agency and always to make it happen also. And thank you to all my team to make it happen, and the audience and Victoria too, and the hotel, which is nicely hosted us.
Thank you very much. So guys, I thank you for bringing me on board, even if I wasn't able to be physically there. I mean, I do appreciate that you were still willing to come and listen to me, although it was a computer. And but I hope that the conversation was good enough for you to have some more space in your life to think about both what we're currently experiencing through this crisis, and also the potential we have with technology. And I hope to see you in person. I mean, I know that from the conversation that Vika I had back in last time I was in Moscow, and also that she's currently having with my co-author and friend Terence, there will be more and more trips to Russia from now on, right? So you will definitely have a chance to see me. And keep me there. Just keep me there.
Thank you.
All right. All the best, guys. I'm going to turn off now, and all the best. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye.
Ciao. Bye. Bye. Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.